I had caught the overnight train to Karlsbad or Karlovy Vary as it's now called from Leipzig in Saxony with an annoying change midway at Cheb and felt pretty scruffy. I had done my best to tidy myself up in the Gents WC. I should really have had my haircut. It was still very student length, a bit floppy, and my suit could do with an ironing, but I was on a low budget. I walked to the plaza where I was to meet our new agent in the open-air cafe as I knew that I was in plenty of time. Since leaving university with a reasonable degree in geology, I had had no job for more than a year and was getting pretty desperate, so was delighted to get a chance to work as a representative for a Russian firm who had developed a new mining process, not that it paid lavishly. My sisters and I had been brought up largely by my Russian grandmother, as Mum was a single working parent, so I was bilingual, which I imagine is mainly why I got the job. Anyway, the cafe was fairly busy and I was only able to get a table at the roadside, but it meant that I could watch out for my contact. I signaled for a coffee while I waited, which came with a large and nice-tasting waffle. There seemed to be some sort of activity for an event going on, as the traffic had stopped going along to road and a couple of police motorcyclists had ridden slowly past, their radios at full chatter, so I turned and watched with interest. The time for my meeting was 10:00, so just before then I began to look out for him and was surprised to discover that apart from 3 other people the entire cafe area was empty, yet only minutes before it was almost full. Suddenly, with a roar, 3 motorcycle police swept by, followed by a large black car. Equally suddenly, the 3 men all stood up and fired at the car. Bullets bounced off it, but one gun seemed to be more powerful as a line of holes appeared along the car's side, and the startled face of the passenger subsided as the car sped by. That I too was startled is to put it mildly, and I stood up to run away, but as I did so, the man with the heavy gun shouted and pointed at me, whereupon one of the other men took a quick shot at me as he ran towards me. He missed and I ran as never before, not even turning as I heard a clatter and a grunt and realized that he must have tripped and dropped his gun. Ahead of me was a classic row of arches and I dived into it for protection, still running flat out. As I ran along the inside of the colonnade, past the tourist shops, a door opened and my arm was grabbed by a woman, pulling me inside. Before I could do anything, she had pushed me into a chair, wrapped a cape over my shoulders and pushed my head into a basin and was running water over it. Over the noise of the water I could hear the sound of running feet, which stopped inside the doorway, and a breathless guttural voice made urgent demands. I could feel the woman's hands trembling as she soaked my hair. Nonetheless, she replied something which seemed to satisfy the man. I heard a series of loud metallic clicks at which the hands shook violently, and his heavy breathing lessened. Mine did too, though my heart was still pounding. I guessed that the man was standing just inside the door with his gun. I could hear outside there was a lot of shouting and vehicle noises. After a while I detected a pause in what she was doing, and then the hands steadied and I could almost feel her thought processes as she was trying to find a way out of her and my predicaments. She couldn't just go on shampooing my hair for hours. If the man realized what was going on, we'd both get shot. Suddenly, as though she had made up her mind to do something different, some acrid-smelling liquid was poured over my head and rubbed well in, left a while, and then rinsed out. The woman then moved so that she was now on the man's side of me so he couldn't see me. As she tilted my head backwards, she managed to push some sweet-smelling waxy thing across my lips. It dawned on me that it must be lipstick, which I supposed might disguise me a little, as he could have had little time to see my face at the onset. What was she doing? I couldn't say anything even if she could understand, as the aggressive man's breathing showed he was only a few feet away, though she had been carrying on a one-sided conversation with me, just chatting, I hoped. Now I was upright. I could see the man out of the corner of my eye. He was tucked into the corner of the shop window, not really looking my way thankfully, and had his gun in both hands at the ready. The woman was pushing things into my hair and screwing it into what felt like bunches. That done, she pushed my chair backwards and pulled a metal dome over my head. By now her fear had completely gone and I felt she was acting routinely, in fact quite ignoring the man. My head became hot, rather comforting really, making me almost drowsy. Whilst I sat, she took one of my hands and quickly glued some pink plastic nails over my own, then the same with the other hand before pushing a woman's magazine into my lap. I flicked over the pages, trying to make sense of the weird typeface with all its odd accents and delighted by some of the pictures of the models. Meanwhile, the woman spoke sharply to the man, who seemed less assured now and finally just walked out of the shop. He must have hidden his gun somehow. She lifted off the dome and spent a while removing the things she had stuck in my hair, before combing and brushing it a lot. Finally, she removed the cape and rapidly removed my jacket and undid my tie, leaving the shirt open at the neck. That done, she grabbed some cotton wool and stuffed 2 bunches of it down the neck of the shirt onto my chest and then searched in a drawer for something. After a while rummaging about, she produced 2 bits of sparkling jewelry which she clipped on my earlobes. They had quite painful screws on them which she made quite tight and checked by tugging them. Having done everything, she made me stand up and pulled out my pink shirt over my trousers, leaving it loose. Only then did she let me look in a mirror. At last I could see what she had done. My head had a ring of blonde curls about a neatly waved top. The earrings and lipstick had added a feminine appearance, making me look quite a bit like my older sister. I found myself making the very first girly gesture of my life when I raised both my hands and pressed my hair upwards as I watched myself in the mirror. It was just instinctive. I had to shake myself hard to get a grip on what was happening to me. I had become too relaxed, an overreaction to my fear, and suddenly remembered my document case with its contents lying out in the open on the cafe table. I signed to the woman that I was going outside, and before she could stop me, I left her shop and walked to the cafe area. There were a number of police standing around and a couple of photographers snapping away at the shooting scene, but I took a chance and went to the table that I had left only just over an hour or so ago. It was a false hope. There was no sign of it either on top of or under the table. In fact, everything was bare, no ashtrays, glasses, or even toothpick holders on any of the tables. I tried to look casual and walked through the whole cafe area, glancing about me in the hope that it might have been moved, without success. My way back was barred by a policeman who directed me away, saying something that I could only guess at least it was nothing about the way I looked, so I tried a quick smile. I managed to circle round and dodged 2 others busy on their radios and slipped back into the colonnade, working my way back to the hairdressers. Presumably because of the police, nobody had come for their hair appointments. I tried speaking to her in English then Russian, but they were meaningless to her, I found, so instead by signs I managed to show that I was apologizing for running out, as I had realized that she had put herself at considerable risk to help me and that neither of us was actually safe even now. She went to a back room and made us both a cup of coffee and, pointing to herself, said, "Krista," several times, then at me, so I said Mike, but she shook her head and said, "Magda," again several times. So Magda it was to be, and I repeated it to her so that she could see that I understood. Some time later she looked at her watch and indicated that waiting around any longer achieved nothing. She pointed to the back room and made it clear that I was to stay in there. I was actually mentally worn out, so by arranging a stack of towels into a sort of mattress I managed to build up a bed and lay down to rest after a very eventful day. Inevitably exhausted though I was, I still had a sleepless night with new thoughts crowding in all the time. Apart from the very obvious change in my appearance, what actually was to be my future? I was now completely without any proof of who I was, had no money and couldn't speak the language, and all my documents were in the missing case. Trying to contact my new firm would not be easy as all the details were lost, and trying to pick up from where I had left off very complicated. I must have eventually dozed off, because I was awakened by my savior Krista shaking me and pushing a newspaper under my nose, clearly expecting me to read it. I didn't need to read. There, right across the front page, was a picture of their injured president in hospital, looking pretty bad, but much worse. Beneath that were 4 pictures of men. The last one was clearly me and must have come from my passport and had my name, Michael Hughes, below it anyway. I guessed that the others were the gunmen and that I had been identified as part of the gang. If I added my nighttime worries to that final blow, then I was well and truly sunk. Not only was I in effect a non-person, but I was also being branded as a criminal, a possible murderer, and the only person who knew the truth was Krista, who had watched everything from her salon window. It looked as though she too had been thinking a lot. She handed me a ham-filled baguette and a bulging bag. The bulge was a pair of low-heeled white pumps, a navy skirt, a pink t-shirt and a white cotton bra and panties. At first I flatly refused to try any of them on, but she just picked up the newspaper and waved it at me, then with the well-known sign pointed her forefinger at her head then wiped it across my throat. I still refused, so she just walked out of the storeroom and closed the door. The click of a lock made it clear that I had no real alternative. Whilst I ate the baguette I spread out the clothes. Not that any of them were unfamiliar to me. As the middle child between two sisters I was only too well aware of dripping tights in the bathroom, the intricacies of bra adjustments and assorted skirts thrown about as the morning panic of what to wear to work was made. After still more mental debate, because up till then I hadn't really joined up all the dots of my situation, I decided that there really was no choice, so I stripped, not as easily as usual as I had forgotten about my long fingernails which made unzipping my trousers awkward and hooking up the bra was no simpler either. Once done I stuffed the bra with the cotton wool, which when the t-shirt covered it seemed quite presentable though pulling on the panties didn't have quite the same effect. The skirt was fairly full so nothing which shouldn't be there was visible, though I had tucked things away as best I could. I had to knock on the door several times before she opened it. Perhaps she was making it clear who was in charge. Anyway, calling me Magda, she pointed to a stool and proceeded to tidy my hair and for a few minutes or so made my face up with assorted brushes and tubes. Standing back she checked me over, then handed me a double apron to put on and indicated that I should tidy up the magazines, sweep the floor, polish the mirrors and clean the basins. I was just too late to stop her collecting up all my own clothes from the back room and putting them in the waste hopper outside along with all the hair trimmings, empty bottles and other salon rubbish. Hardly had she done that when the first customer of the day arrived, and then began the non-stop chatter that I would become used to over the months to come. Of course the subject was the attempted assassination of the president and such was its intensity that I was completely ignored, but was able to watch what went on and what was needed. I actually found it all quite absorbing and soon worked out when I could help as customers came and went. I even managed to grasp a few words and by the end of the day I swept up and replaced everything, and even pointed out where bottles were nearly empty. I had lost track of the time, we were so busy, but at some stage a man came in with a basket of rolls and cakes and looked at me for rather too long for comfort. Krista ordered some rolls which distracted him, though I noticed him pause at the door as he left to look back. Was he just curious? I was still very conscious of the sudden change in my appearance and didn't really feel in the least feminine, certainly not enough to believe that my movements were instinctively those of a girl. Perhaps she felt that he was focusing on my figure because she disappeared briefly to come back with a couple of sponges to replace the cotton wool which was not performing as well as it did, and indicated that I should do something about it. They certainly put more spring in my step, so to speak. For the next few weeks I slept in the back room and discovered what I already knew from my sisters, that it took much longer for a girl to get ready than a man in the morning, not helped by long fingernails. Just putting on a bra took longer than a vest, the ritual of makeup and hair tidying, drawing up stockings much longer than peeling on a pair of trousers and so on. I slowly worked out a routine and had to wake earlier to fit it all in. It wasn't a chore because I realized that my safety depended on getting it right, and I found that I actually enjoyed the intimacy of my underwear, not something that my male kit ever provided. I discovered that I was beginning to understand why things that were never normally on show, truly underwear, were available in such a huge range of colors and different styles made of or trimmed with lace, though I could never see me getting a break from plain white cotton. I used to tease my sisters in the past about the way that they used to cross their arms when taking off a petticoat or dress. It always seemed quite wrong, but I soon discovered it was the best way to cope with the length of material. Straight up didn't work. During the day I helped about the shop, or really it was a salon, as a sort of prisoner on parole. I could go for walks within the colonnade outside just to get fresh air. I learned another lesson there too. When the cold wind blew down from the mountains it whistled around the columns, along the passage and finished up under my skirt around the unprotected parts of my backside. Always a surprise, a bit upsetting, and I never got used to it. Otherwise really my life was as a day-long hairdresser's assistant, actually more of an apprentice, because Krista taught me something new every day. Of course I learned the language, though because my world had become exclusively a woman's one the vocabulary was similar, and I found myself grasping how a woman thought, and actually watched for special gestures such as hand and head movements to copy. It wasn't so long ago there that people actually informed on other people to the police, and I wasn't going to go through all the changes that I had to slip up and finally get arrested. Anyway, I was really enjoying my new life and wanted to be as good as I could be, and most importantly, I need to be as safe as I could be. Some of the stories that the older customers told about their past sent shivers up and down my spine. Sometimes a client gave Krista a bottle of wine and we'd drink it together that evening whilst we would go through the magazines looking for a new hairstyle or color which we'd try out on me there and then. To begin with, because my hair was quite short, the styles were limited, not that the colors were. One time it would be back to my original dark brown with frosting to make it interesting, or ash blonde, or one of my favorites, deep chestnut. She used me as a model for her clients, to try to get them to try something new, and I found each different look a delight, which I think helped them decide that they'd try it too. I got so enthusiastic that I managed to persuade her to do a new style straight from the magazines, which I leafed through often, even when there was no bottle of wine. It was just great fun to see the new me each time whilst we giggled together like children as she worked on me. One day, because she was short of time, she let me help her with a client's makeup, which I found fun. As a child I had enjoyed painting and it was really very similar. The client was delighted and gave me my first real tip of 150 koruna, and so was Krista. From that day I became her specialist, and word got round because we were asked to prepare young women for their weddings more and more, which was nice because we got to go to their homes and could share in all the excitement. Now I felt completely at ease as a specialist and a woman. I was able to buy underwear and clothes with the money I earned, though it was not a lot. I had managed to find a branch of the UK supermarket Tesco's, of all places, that sold its own brand of cheap clothes. Inevitably I made mistakes, the wrong color or inappropriate style, and Krista explained why and made me take them back. She also made certain that my legs were hairless, quite easy in a salon after all. I found something out in a very different way, because once when I was in a hurry I had bought a pair of knickers far too large, and whilst I was talking to a client I became aware of an odd feeling about my legs. The knickers were slowly sliding downwards and all I could do was hobble away whilst pressing tightly on my skirt. Everybody there of course understood, and I was teased unmercifully, though they said that I should have let them fall all the way and just picked them up. In the past apparently, the East German knicker elastic was well known to go unexpectedly, so it used to be quite a common problem. A few days after that she said that she had found me a bedsitter nearby, so I had moved out of the back room, which was just as well as I had developed a strong desire for pretty dresses and shoes and needed more space to keep them. As time went by I became increasingly accepting of my position as lowly hairdresser's assistant, and the fact that I was a stateless illegal immigrant faded into the background. Each night, taking advantage of the secrecy of my room, I practiced pitching my voice higher and making it softer. Not easy to do the two together, but in the end I achieved it. No one seemed to doubt that I was a young woman, and I found myself a changing person, no longer that male geology graduate in a suit, striving to make a name for himself, but a happy girl immersed in womanly company. Though I occasionally was aware of a certain look from young men whilst I was out shopping, I knew that if I showed any reaction things could get out of hand, and it just wasn't worth the risk. Prison always lurked in the back of my mind, no matter how much I was enjoying my new life. All that changed suddenly one Friday. As usual, we had started the day early to be ready for the weekend rush when the door was flung open and 3 armed policemen and 1 woman stormed in. Before we could say anything I was grabbed, arms locked behind my back in handcuffs, and forced to walk at a stumbling trot out to a black truck parked nearby, and pushed into the back with 2 of the police. The door slammed and we sped off in absolute silence. Not a word was spoken, and I was too shattered to say anything. The journey did not take more than a few minutes. At that time of the morning few people were about, and the final rumbling told me we were driving over cobbles, which turned out to be the yard of a massive stone building. I had little time to take anything in as I was propelled through double doors into a bare room and left to stand in front of a long high counter. I stood there, completely ignored, in the custody area for a long time as various people were brought in and taken away. Eventually, the handcuffs were removed so that my fingerprints could be taken, my photograph taken, and when asked I simply gave my name as Magda Kovac. My bracelets, earrings, and necklace were removed, labeled and bagged to disappear behind the counter. It was all very impersonal and demeaning. My original year-old fears came flooding back. Had somebody, a client perhaps, told the authorities about me? If so, why? How could it benefit anybody? I was marched down a corridor lined with steel doors, one of which was opened by a sour-faced warder using a key from a huge bunch hanging from her belt. And I was pushed. The light from the passageway showed that the room, or rather cell, had bare concrete walls covered in largely red graffiti, and propped up against one wall was an obvious hooker by her short skirt and thigh boots, an evil-looking gypsy crouched in a corner, and an old woman either drunk or high on drugs who lay in the other corner muttering loudly to herself. They ignored me completely as the door clanged shut and was locked noisily. There was no seat or bed, so once my eyes had accustomed themselves to the dim light, I sat down against the wall, nearest the door. The gypsy took herself off to the bucket in the corner and, hoisting her multiple skirts, performed loudly, as yet another high street girl was added to the cell. Her cheap perfume at least overpowered the other scents. The cell was now quite full, and we all tried to find a comfortable position on the floor, which was not easy as it was not only cold and hard but damp as well. The chill made me wonder how long I could hold out before needing to use the bucket myself, and of course the more I thought about it and its ramifications, the more likely it became. That worry was thankfully interrupted by the clatter of 5 metal bowls being pushed through a flap at the bottom of the door. Dinner was served. Well, that was a flattering description for a sour-tasting porridge with bits of tough meat scattered over it, which we had to eat using our fingers to scoop it into our mouths. I had worked out that the time to use the bucket was during the night, choosing when they all seemed asleep, which I managed without anybody spotting my problem. No more women joined us, and we settled down to living together in our small evil-smelling world until after 3 days the 2 street girls were taken out, leaving just the 3 of us with a bit more room. That relief didn't last long, as halfway through the night the cell was opened and a smartly dressed middle-aged woman was pushed in, taking my place as I was grabbed and pulled outside. Again the half-trot was forced upon me as we passed rows of cells and up narrow twisting steps till finally we stopped at a solid door. Smartly one of the warders knocked on it and we walked into a sparsely furnished office with a large central desk at which sat an obviously senior officer, judging by his metal ribbons. Behind him was a large photograph of the president. The officer looked very fit with close-cropped graying hair, piercing blue eyes, and thin lips partially hidden by a mustache. I was left alone then to stand in front of him as he pulled out a thick file of papers which he opened. There on top was a passport, and even upside down I recognized the documents from my case I lost a year ago. He spoke in Czech as he pulled out a number of photographs. "How have you found our hospitality? Was the food good? Is your room comfortable? It was built by the Gestapo and improved by the Russian NKVD just for our own STB." I shuddered at the memory of the awful cell, but before I could reply he spread some photos in front of me. The first ones were not high quality, presumably taken from CCTV footage. Me in my business suit sitting waiting for my commercial contact, me running into the colonnade, the gunman falling and then following me. Me as blonde girl searching the coffee area, me in t-shirt and skirt. The others were better quality and color, me shopping wearing the summer flowery dress in the market, me carrying food home in a t-shirt and slacks, me taking rubbish to my bin in a pink housecoat, and so on. "As you can see, we know exactly who you are," he now spoke in accented English. "And so now we have brought you in because you are a criminal and an illegal immigrant working without paying taxes, obviously avoiding arrest for many months. You can see that we have all the evidence that we need for a conviction, and I can now set the legal processes into action. Have you anything to say before I send you back to join your friends in their cozy room?" I hadn't used English for so long that I replied in Czech, "Can I be allowed to contact the British Embassy?" "No, of course not. Don't waste my time. You are down here in the station register as Magda Kovac, whom they will not have on their records." He pressed a button and a woman warder appeared shortly. He waved me away and she handcuffed me again before opening the door. Just as we were leaving the room he said almost off-handedly, As an alternative to prison for many years, I can make you an offer. Are you interested? Whatever it was, it couldn't be worse than life imprisonment within such an organization, or anywhere for that matter. After all, my real crime was only not paying tax on my earnings. So I nodded, and the warder brought me back to his desk before leaving me again. Recently, an easily mined and very pure form of uranium has been discovered in the Ur Mountains not far from here, and both the Russians and the Americans are trying to do a deal over the government's heads. My job is to find out what their plans are, and that's where you come in. You speak English and Russian fluently as well as passable Czech. If you were in the right place at the right time, you could discover what they are up to. We shall sign you up as social secretary to the foreign minister, on full pay with an appropriate dress allowance and a suitable apartment near the ministry. What you have to do is get involved with some of the Russian and US people and use your obvious charms, and of course never reveal that you understand their languages. But I might get found out in the worst way, I replied. That is entirely up to you, my dear young Magda. At the worst, it is just a diplomatic embarrassment to us all, but the alternative I have already described and you have slightly experienced. So what do you think? Just a year ago I had agonized at length over wearing girls' clothing and had survived the experience, so this time I gave in immediately. After all, as he said, it was only embarrassment. Okay, I'll try, but what happens to me after I've got the information? Well, we could give you a passport under your new name, but there would be no more government support, so you'd have to make your own way. Perhaps back working as a wedding planner with your friend Krista. What about my criminal record? That will remain on the file so that we both know who is in charge. It still seemed a lot better deal, so I accepted there and then, but he signed again to the warder, and to my horror I was taken down to the cells again. Was he just playing with me, I wondered, as I was locked back in a new but empty cell? The utter bastard, I thought. I bet he really enjoyed that little bit of trickery. The usual routine of tin bowl and bucket went on, and I felt utterly dejected and cheated. Was this reality? I had read that prisoners were kept for years before actually having their case heard, and I could only count the days by the number of meals. The single bare light bulb was never switched off, so privacy was deliberately blocked, and the usual metal bucket was placed in the far corner in full view from the warder's little window. I was allowed only once a day to wash, but completely alone, though it meant that I could at least rinse my underclothes and put them back on damp, with the water only wrung out as best I could. After, I think, 10 meals, when the next was about due, the cell door was opened and I was beckoned outside and led even deeper in the building to a small door which to my relief opened onto a small yard. There was a large black car and the driver opened its door for me. Not a word was spoken by anybody, and off we went threading our way along mean back streets. The car finally stopped outside an elegant building. The driver gave me a numbered key, nodded goodbye, and I was left on the pavement in my very crumpled and dirty clothes. Before I had even moved, I had a number of sympathetic looks from passers-by, probably those who could remember the bad old days of the secret police. The building was a warren of corridors and rooms, but at least the doors were numbered and the creaking lift worked, so I eventually found my apartment, number 34. The key worked smoothly, and I found myself in a surprisingly large reception room, deeply carpeted and ringed by delicate antique furniture with a lovely view out over the city. Further, and I found another room decorated opulently in pink and ivory drapes with a central double bed similarly covered. The whole setup seemed much more than a mere social secretary could afford, and the bed reinforced the idea that more was expected of me than casual listening to men talking, not that there was a lot that I could do about it. By the bed was an envelope which contained the equivalent of $700 and instructions to report at the foreign ministry next morning, where I would be employed. Should I go out immediately and buy some new clothes, or should I take what I was wearing off and try to clean them up beforehand? I decided that money talks and went out straight away to a podium shop on a spending spree, no matter how bad I looked or probably smelt. 6 pairs of tights, 3 skirts, 5 blouses, 3 dresses, 2 handbags, 4 pairs of shoes and 3 sets of matching underwear. After all, there's not much point in being a girl if you can't have lovely smalls, I had decided after putting up with plain white cotton for such a long time. I chose a pale pink set with high leg panties and underwired bra all covered in rose-colored embroidery, a boy brief in aqua silk edged with deep blue and a matching bra, and lastly a black bikini brief and balconette bra made of the softest lace. I don't know what made me do it, but in middle of the lingerie department was displayed a long black nylon nightie with elaborate lace trimming, so I spent the last of the cash on it. After all, I deserved it. I came back almost buried in carrier bags and was thankful for the creaky lift. Whilst stripping off, I ran the bath, a wonderful marble thing with huge taps, and lay soaking till the water cooled, and then went to lie on that wonderful bed, not naked, but wrapped in that beautiful black night dress. What heaven after all that time lying on the concrete floor of the prison cell. Thoroughly relaxed and feeling quite sensual, I later spread everything across the bed before choosing which bra to wear. I went for the pink embroidered one, and the panties just followed, tucking everything well away as a matter of course, and drew a pair of light tan tights up my newly shaved legs. I shouldn't have done in that order because I hadn't decided whether to wear a skirt and top or a dress first, but it was so wonderful to feel the soft silky control about my body after a week or more of sodden cotton undies that I couldn't wait. It was fantastic to screw up my old clothes and stuff them into the waste bin. It seemed as though the sun had come out in my life at last, but then with a shock I realized that I had not even given a single thought to poor Krista. I decided that I must visit her, and a floaty silky dress covered in multicolored flowers would be ideal so she could share my delight. So popping the key in my purse, I left the building and walked until I finally reached the colonnades. The whole experience of being free, clean and attractively dressed sent me on a high, but when I walked into Krista's salon I burst into tears again as we hugged each other. She insisted that she closed her salon there and then and took me home to her flat, which I had never seen, so that we could talk in private. Naturally we chatted for hours as I explained everything, whilst she cooked supper. As I had spent all the ministry money on clothes, I had nothing to pay for food, so it was a double delight to unburden myself and eat her lovely home-cooked meal. She had never expected to see me again, as the deep fear that still existed about the secret police, matched with the attempted assassination, had persuaded her that I was gone forever. As I had hoped, she was delighted for me and of course complimented me on my choice of dress. Late at night I made my farewells, and she pressed a small bag of waffles upon me as we kissed goodbye. By now I was exhausted with all that had happened that day, and thankful that I was wearing sensible shoes, returned to my apartment slowly with aching legs and feet. I should have known that I was still not really a free agent though, as on my pillow was another envelope. Its contents told me to attend, wearing a dress appropriate for a top-level social gathering, tomorrow evening at 6:30. A car would pick me up at 6:00. I managed to undress and put on my special nightie before falling into a deep sleep, only awakening long after the sun was up, bathing my room in its welcoming light. What a change from last night in the bleak concrete cell. I knew all about little black dresses from my sisters, so that had been a first choice when I had shopped. I would set it off with gold jewelry and strappy high-heeled sandals, I had decided, though the jewelry must be low-key as befitted a middle civil servant, and settled on a thin chain necklace, a single bangle and little star earrings. That wouldn't be a reason not to wear the black lacy lingerie set that I had bought. Who would know? And mother always said make sure you have your best underpinnings on when you go out, in case you end up in hospital. I broke open the pair of 7 denier sandal-toed tights I had bought especially, and out of my shoe collection I had no problem with choosing a strappy pair of gold high-heeled stiletto sandals to match the necklace. Though I say it myself, I set that dress off very nicely, black Morse silk with a wide sash and a waterfall tail down in front and a plunging neckline, just low enough for the very top edge of my bra to hint at its presence. After a lot of thought, I felt that a change from my usual pink to bright scarlet nail polish would add the finishing touch. After almost a year, my hair, which Krista had kept blonde, had grown long enough to roll up in a French chignon which seemed appropriate for the event, suitably smart but elegant. It was the favorite style amongst our young brides, so I could do it blindfold. I was careful to use a delicate hint of makeup to ensure a demure look appropriate to my role, only a little eyeshadow, pale lipstick and a light dusting of blusher rouge on my cheeks. Exactly on time a car came to pick me up, driven by a rather plain young man in a dark suit who explained that he was the minister's personal interpreter and that my role was to keep close to them both and do whatever was needed. He drove through the archway of a huge building like a palace, which I learnt later it had been, parked, and lead me through what was probably the original servants' entrance to where the reception was to be held, in a magnificent chamber, lined with statues and mirrors and lit by a huge chandelier. He introduced me to an aristocratic-looking man, an ex-count I learnt, who had survived the communist purges and was now the foreign minister. The three of us stood under the chandelier, whilst waiters busied themselves around us with trays laden with drinks and canapes. It reminded me a little of the special dinners at university. Quickly the room filled with guests, mostly middle-aged business types with a scattering of women and younger men. I stayed close to the minister and his interpreter. Every so often he wanted me to get something or make notes, so I was kept busy with no chance to socialize. I found standing around in high heels, which I had never worn before, totally wearying and longed to kick them off. My toes were throbbing and my calves ached. At last the reception slowly came to an end, and as the room emptied, one of the waiters gave me a note written, I recognized, in Russian. Though I was a fluent speaker, I had never studied the written word and was saved from giving myself away so early into the job, as it was quite meaningless to me. I showed it to the interpreter, who grinned widely and said that it was an invitation to join the writer for dinner as soon as the reception finished. I looked at the remaining guests and became aware that two young men were standing together watching me. I was in a quandary. Was this the golden opportunity to learn something, or was it something that I'd regret getting involved with? Things had been going altogether too fast for me, and I chickened out by waving at them and shaking my head. One man prodded the other in the chest and slapped him on the back, and they went their way, leaving with the last of the guests, whilst the three of us relaxed. The minister thanked us both for our help and said he expected to see us both tomorrow first thing for our reports, at which the interpreter kindly said he would take me home. As we pulled up at the apartment building, a large car parked behind immediately ours, out stepped one of the young men. He was tall and had a mischievous twinkle in his eyes, which I found disturbingly attractive, as he came to my window and spoke to me in a strong American accent. Fortunately, my friend translated for me before I slipped up, and told me that he was asking me to have dinner with him. I interrupted by asking if he spoke Czech. He replied, only a little, perhaps enough to get by. I had only had a couple of canapes at the reception and no lunch at all, so was really hungry. Accepting his invitation was not a problem, and I let him open the car door and offer his hand to help me out. I thanked my interpreter friend and said, "See you early tomorrow morning at the ministry." The American offered his passenger seat to me, so I slid in as gracefully as I could, not having been passenger in a car since a boy. It needed a bit of imagination. Getting out at the restaurant was a trial too, remembering not to open my legs wide and revealingly, even though I had rather nice knickers on, and to step out directly on high heels took quite a lot of concentration. Actually, it wasn't that difficult, because the other young man who had been at the reception gave me his hand and said, "Dobry večer." I smiled without replying. Another hurdle passed and said, "Can you speak Czech?" To which the American replied, "No, he's worse than me, watch him though, he fancies himself as a great stud. But his name is Sergey, by the way, and mine is Ed." Naturally I told them my name, and they both offered their arms, and we strolled into the most amazing room, like something out of Tolstoy. High ceilings covered in paintings, each table sparkling with local crystal were lit by glass candlesticks and ivory-handled cutlery, and everything reflected by the completely mirror-covered walls. We were met by an immaculately clothed waiter who swiftly took us to a table deep in an alcove. I sat in the offered seat and allowed the waiter to pour me a drink that must have been champagne. The label was hidden under a carefully folded napkin, but it tasted wonderful. Ed explained that they had had a bet as to who would have their invitation accepted, the winner paying for the joint meal. Sergey had had the first, unsuccessful, chance. The smell of food swept over me as a series of assorted dishes were brought to us, and I allowed the waiter to give me a little more than a young girl like me might be expected to eat, which met with their general approval. Thankfully, I was famished. We chatted generally about the city and the food, with Ed translating for Sergey every so often, which saved me a couple of times from slipping up. Actually, it is very hard not to reveal something overheard when you are supposed to be in effect deaf, but I slowly got control of myself. At the end, Sergey asked Ed in English if he thought I would be all right, to which he nodded, and suggested that we should have coffee. Turning to me, he said, "There are some friends over there. Would you mind if we joined them for coffee?" By now I was very relaxed, well fed, and enjoying the flattering attention of two young men, so of course I agreed. We went across to another alcove where there were four middle-aged obvious businessmen who also were at the end of their meal. One of them rose and greeted me in almost faultless Czech, but his Slav features left no doubt about his background, though his manners were almost Italian. I sat in the offered seat and was introduced to everybody whilst the waiter placed a large glass in front of me, part filled with a deep brown liquid, not really coffee. It was clear that none of the others spoke Czech, so a rather complex conversation went on, with the Slav talking in Russian to one man and Ed conversing in English to the other two. Determined not to slip up, I forced my mind to stick to one language, because it had dawned on me that these were the very group that I was supposed to spy upon. The talk went on in three layers: mine, the translated level, and the background conversation between the older men. There was no doubt that this was the right group. Apart from the two young men, the other four really carried on as though I wasn't there, though the Slav reached across once or twice and patted my knee in an avuncular way. They had apparently bought up a Czech company and applied through it to buy the rights to mine in the mountains, but had come up against powerful local opposition, and the government was not overly enthusiastic. Between them they debated whether I would be any use through my obvious foreign ministry position to help them. Two felt that I was too simple, just a pretty little thing, but the Slav and an American thought that it was worth trying. One of them suggested that I be offered $5,000, but no decision was made then, as they did not know how I might react. They thought that one of the young men should persevere with a relationship to weigh me up. While that was going on, Sergey said, "Wouldn't it be nice to have a group photograph?" Seeing him bring out his cell phone saved me from yet another slip-up, as it was obvious what was wanted, so we all got together and smiled. By the time it was to go home, I was bubbling with secret information. Ed took me back to my apartment, and rather than getting involved in anything intimate, I had already decided whilst we were driving that what would be appropriate was to offer him my hand to be kissed when we parted, suitably Middle European, feminine and safe. That went off smoothly, and he asked when we could meet again, so I said, "Well, that rather depends, doesn't it?" With that I turned on my heels and left him. The next morning, first thing, I reported back to my friend the translator at the ministry, and to enhance the image of my efficiency on my very first day at the office, chose a plain mid-gray shift dress cut rather austerely, with gray tights, black flats, and my hair pulled back in a ponytail, and a pair of small pearl earrings. Within the hour a car collected me and took me, not to the foreign ministry, but back to police headquarters, where I was taken up to the chief of police. I was really bursting with excitement at what I had learnt, but to my surprise, before I could say anything, he said, "Well, Magda, how much did they offer you?" Presumably either the restaurant was bugged or a waiter was involved, so I asked which it was. Neither. It was a guess that they would have tried to bribe you, the tricky bastard, I thought. "Do you want to know what went on then, or not?" He nodded curtly, so I gave him an extensive rundown on their scheme. I was really annoyed when he said, "Thank you, Magda, you have confirmed what we already knew, and it doesn't look as though you are going to be any further use to us, so you can go." "What about my apartment and job with the ministry?" "Oh, we'll cancel them." I was shattered at his cold abruptness. "You can't do that just like snapping your fingers. I think you will find that we already have." That really frightened me. Was I to be just cast aside? "What about our deal? When shall I get my Czech passport?" He stared bleakly at me. "I don't know what you are talking about. Goodbye." My new world was falling apart, and I seemed powerless to stop it. "You promised that I'd get one." "No, I don't think so. There's nothing down in our records here about that." "You've said enough. You're wasting my time. Go." I screamed a string of very choice words that I had picked up from the women whilst in the cells only a few days ago. But he just pressed a button, and the usual sour-faced warder grabbed and dragged me away, down and out into the street. I felt completely dejected and stood there wondering what on earth to do. All the excitement of the last 24 hours had drained away, and now I was totally alone. No clothes, no job, no money, no passport, no apartment, nothing except what I stood up in. As it all sunk in, I couldn't help bursting into tears. Just when a car pulled up alongside me, the window wound down and Ed leant across and said, "Get in." "How did you get here?" I asked. "I'll come clean, I've been keeping tabs on you after last night. Why have you been to the police rather than your work at the foreign ministry for a start? What have they done to you to get you in a state like this?" While he questioned me, he drove to his hotel, and once there we went to the bar, which at time in the morning was empty. He called for 2 coffees, and he then hesitantly asked me if I'd accept some money in return for helping his friends. I told him that I no longer had a job at the ministry and that I was homeless and without anything other than what I was wearing, so wasn't able help to anybody. Before I could help myself, in a flood of words between sobs, I told him in English about the attempted assassination and how I was an illegal immigrant without papers, so could be jailed at any moment. Ed listened to what must have seemed a disjointed fairy tale and said, "Hold on, I've a buddy in the CIA stationed in Prague, we go back a long way. I'll see if he can help." By now he knew that I spoke English perfectly, and it was a lot easier for us both. He went away for a long time, leaving me very alone, but at least off the streets. I did not know how vindictive the chief of police could be, and I was scared that he might get me rounded up again. He seemed capable of arranging anything malicious. Over an hour later, the bar was beginning to fill, and I was aware of several guests wondering why I was sitting there alone. It dawned on me that my tears had done nothing for my makeup, and was thankful that I had used no mascara, so I went to the ladies to freshen up. I still had my cosmetics bag with me, fortunately. Luckily, Ed and I almost collided, as he had been looking for me and had just walked out of the bar. "Gee babe, you had me worried. I couldn't find you. I thought that you might have been arrested while I was away. Anyway, the good news is we've got you sorted. You leave tonight. You'd better come up to my room until then, and I promise I'll behave myself. It might be better if we didn't use the lift, it has CCTV installed." After my recent brushes with the local police, I was only too well aware what that meant. He strode up the stairs, leaving me trailing behind. The gray shift dress had quite a tight hem, restricting my knees. Once we were in his very comfortable room, I collapsed on the bed and fell immediately into a deep but disturbed sleep. Whether Ed's intentions were honorable or not, I was past caring as long as he got me free. I awoke with a start, finding myself mixed up in the counterpane across rather than along the bed. I had clearly been very restless whilst asleep. My dress was wrapped up well above my knees. Ed was gently shaking me. "It's time to go. You might want to pretty yourself up a bit before we leave." As he talked, he handed me a well-used American passport. On opening it, I found there was my photograph, which could only have come from Sergei's cell phone, and my name as Magda Kovac. The other details were all plausible, and the number of visa stamps showed that I traveled widely. I went to the bathroom and did my best to repair the day's damage, then joined Ed as we left by the fire escape. I was deeply thankful that I wasn't wearing high heels. At the bottom, in a small yard, was vintage sports car. Out got Sergei with a smile. Ed stood looking at me curiously for a second or two, then said he won the bet, so he's going to take you all the way. He's very proud of that car, so you're honored. Good luck. See you in the States. Giving me a hesitant kiss on the cheek, he paused and looked at me again with an odd expression and left to climb the stairs, and we sped off in a cloud of blue smoke. Sergei grinned at me, giving me the thumbs up sign, and we surged off into the night. The speed made conversation impossible within the canvas and plexiglass cover, but at least it ensured that the journey was fast except for the tolls. I should have known that it wasn't all for love. Well, perhaps it was, because he suddenly pulled into the side, stopped the car, and leant over and kissed me. I was so surprised. No one had ever done that to me before, and for a second I responded. Then I screamed at him in Russian, "No, you don't. Get me to the airport, now." He grunted an apology and drove on, and we arrived in time for the flight to New York. He got out at departures and, having helped me out, accompanied me to the check-in desk. Really, after his earlier attempt, I should have been prepared for what happened next, as he grasped me tightly and then gave me a very long and public kiss, before smacking me on the bottom and waving goodbye. I guess he knew that I wouldn't make a scene. If he'd been less of a ram, he might have wondered quite where his knee was going, I certainly knew. And the clumsy oaf mussed my hair all up too. I was left gasping for breath anyway, so I couldn't yell at him. It had really upset me. I was still a man underneath everything, and it took a moment or two before I was able to think clearly. Not surprisingly, I had no luggage and he had already given me a ticket for Delta Airlines, so I ran across the concourse and was able to go straight through from the check-in desk to clearance. In fact, I wasn't able to relax until I had finally passed through immigration, very relieved that there hadn't been a body scanner, half expecting either for the passport to be rejected or a policeman's hand on my shoulder. I really didn't need Sergey's efforts as well, and I hadn't realized just how pent up I was, and I urgently needed to use the ladies. As I hoisted my dress to get to my panties, a little square of paper fell out, which I picked up and unwrapped. It was a $50 bill. Written right across it was, "Good luck, buddy boy, I haven't told Sergey."